Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The talk this evening is designed to bring back memories and also encourage present-day snappers to record what's out there. I am not an expert on the subject, but hope this presentation will encourage people to look at their family albums to see if they have any of the missing information. The Society is grateful to several local people who had the foresight to record the local shops in their time. Billy McKend, who recorded them in a notebook. These notes record the shops in the 1953, which I will mention, and some of them have an update in the mid-60s. Robin Middleton, who noticed that the shops in town were changing ownership in the 70s and 80s, and Sandy Bowick, who copied and took photographs in the 70s and 80s. This is Billy's notebook. You can see how meticulous he was in recording all the shops in that time. In recent times, Sam Kelly has recorded all the local businesses and shops, along with matching them to many images, press cuttings and postcards given to him by the late Jeanette Miller. Many of you will have seen these posted on Facebook. We are very grateful to Sam because he has since donated all these to the Society. Jeanette Miller's family has presented 4 of our local postcard albums to the Society. And I'm especially grateful to Vivian Dania, who gave me a memory stick, all the shops on it, having the dates with them. We're grateful to all these folk for their foresight. Key Store is a national convenience store franchise which is part of J.W. Phil's Hill. They followed Mitchell's, which was commonly called Mods. As you can see, we're starting on the first shop on the right, coming into town. Previous was Jack and Ellie's, and here we have Granny behind the counter. Many of the shops we don't have photographs for, so sometimes adverts have been used or in individuals' photos. Well-known ice cream shop was Patterson's, owned and run by Bob Patterson and family from 1960. Bob Patterson was a well-known figure in town. He was one of the original traders who started the summer activities, which eventually became the summer festivities. A highlight in the Kirkcudbright history happened in 1963, when the 610 goods train's brakes failed during the descent from Tarf to Kirkcudbright, and the engine driver was unable to stop the train. On reaching the end of the line, it collided with a carriage which was standing at the station. As can be seen here, the collision caused it to burst through the buffers and land in Bridge Street, colliding with the wall opposite. Also note the sets. They were placed here to strengthen the road during the war, when tanks were brought into the town. Once again, a snapshot that gives us quite a bit of information. Angelini's in 1953 was a confectioner with a cafe, and it was well known for their ice cream. Their recipe was passed on to Patterson's, where it still proved popular. I'm not sure of the date of here, but it was in the 20s, and Omisi can be read above the door. I'm not sure when they were here, but they were a popular customer, especially as a popular couple, especially in the local musical world. and in 1922 it was a private house. Next door we have Bramble's Delicatessen. Previously Corson's, run by Bob Patterson, and had a door through to his shop. Before that, many will remember it as Dolly Clark's Sweetie Shop, 1953. Before that, Bob Murray had a cycle repair shop here. Pure Beauty was for a short time the original Kirkcudbright Summer Festivities charity shop before going to the old bus station. Note the number is 46. Previously a fruit and vegetable and fish shop, Maud and Quinton Mitchell, McIntyre's, Sloane's, when it was owned by McMaths in 1953. Many of you will remember their garden, which is now Hub's car park. And a William Brown. I don't know much about this shop except to say it was owned by a William, and note it is 46, so it was on that side of the road. Another shop in town owned by W. Brown is this one in St. Cuthbert Street, where the Paul Jones is now. Cavers and Company is next. And previous was Mrs. Kelly's. It seldom happened that anyone who went into Kelly's came out without what they were looking for. Who can forget the parcels and boxes behind the shelf, behind the counter? Note J.J. Palmer. Sam's grandfather, John Kelly, served his apprenticeship here, eventually handing it over and passing it on to his son, Edward. When Edward died, his wife Grace ran it, till she retired when she passed it on to her uncle, on to Gladys, her daughter-in-law, and who retired in 2001. Here we have Mrs. Kelly on the right, with Chrissy Vaughan on the left, an assistant for a long time in the shop. Previous to the KBT pharmacy, Jackie Ringrose started her picture framing business here, prior to moving it along the street to its present premises. Before that, it was a fruit and vegetable shop. Here in 2008, daisies can be read on the window. Many people will remember it as always being a chemist. McCrindle's, Dalrymple's in 1953, and Hewkins, who were also in Castle Street. This shop has had a very varied life. At present, it's a memorabilia shop. Previous to that, Julie Hollis had a fine arts shop here. For some time, it was Willow's, the fruit shop, the flower shop, and gifts, opened by Margot Brown and followed by Lynn Kearney, who has since moved the business along the street. Rocking Horse was a children's toys and clothes shop. And previous to that, there was Lux Penny, which had games machines and a cafe, the China Centre, which was China with a tea room at the back. McMichael's Bakery was there for many years with a large bakehouse at the rear. It was there in 1953. Gordon's Bakery sold McMichael's in 1945. The Gordons were connected to another shop which was in High Street. Gordon's Bakery in High Street here. There is still a house down the close known as Bakehouse, and Gordon House was, of course, until recently opposite. On the left is James Andrew Gordon, and on the right Alexander Edward Gordon, who died in 1930, and who is the late Haig Gordon's father. And you can see the milk churns on the back here. Jeff converted the house to business premises in the early 80s, having come from across the road. Next door, Pleat. This photograph was 2009. It's owned by Sunita Rathore and is a woman's clothing shop. Prior to that, 2009, we have Johnson's Sports Shop. Many years it was a shoe shop. D&E's, Greenlee's and Easy Fits in 1953 with the Murphy sisters. I am not claiming that this is the Murphy sisters. Willow, where it moved to with Lynn Kearney. Previously, the Development Trust was there. Print Studio with Kim and George Lowe. And Haining Butchers, latterly run by Tom Twynham, previously Donald and Robin Haining, who took over after the tragic accident which killed their father Willie in 1964, along with Haig Gordon Sr., whose Gordon relations we saw in the bakery photos earlier. This photo on the left was 2009, and on the right we have an early advertisement for it when it was also at game dealers. Kennedy's Gifts and Collectibles next door. This was in 2009. And previously was Kinnear's. Kinnear's were newsagents and stationers, which for a time was Aitken's. Alan Kinnear took over from his father, Colin. Colin came to the town in the early 50s to take over the family shop, owned and run by his aunt, Miss Conning. Connings was a newsagent and printers for many years, as can be seen in old postcards. Here is Connings and another one with Connings on the left this time, and notice it's published by Connings Kirkcudbright. Canton House, next along. Previously, Davy Irving, who along with Mrs. Irving had a fruit, vegetable and florist shop here. Mr. Irving, along with Colin Kinnear, was a town councillor for several years. For many years, it was Hastings Fruit, Flower and Vegetables, owned and run by Jack Hastings, was here in 1953 and here in an earlier photograph, showing Jack Hastings in his younger days. Jack retired in 1985, and when he could then concentrate on being a well-known local artist. Next door, at present, Kirkcudbright Picture Framers, where Jackie Ringrose brought it from along the street. and before that was William Ross. Willie Ross took over Klingons as a manager in 1953, buying it in 1959, and in 1961 he was joined by his son Douglas, better known as Dougie. The right-hand window was usually full of a variety of whiskies for which they were very well known. They were known to have 50 malts and 150 miniatures, their best sellers being these: Little Ross, Whisky Jean, and Kirkcudbright. In 1996, a German tourist asked if he could take their photo. 2 years later, a calendar arrived with this photo as one of the months. In 1966, they took over the running of Ferguson's Grocers in Castle Street, with Herbert Sewell as manager. Two stalwarts of the business, Herbert on the left and Lorimer Patterson on the right. For those in country areas, they had a van. Here, Mr. Macready is in the Winniligget area. A complete history of the life of a master grocer can be found on the website, given to us by Dougie. Another example of a snapshot. Presumably this was the snow of 1947. Approximately 100 years ago, a grocer's shop, Barr's, was in this position. Mr. Barr was very philanthropic. He set up the Barr Trust, which is now part of the Common Good Fund. Back to the beginning of the other side of the street, we have an independent bookshop. 2013, a veterinary surgery. And in 2009, Niche, which was an accessories shop. Prior to that, the corner gallery was here with their knitwear. They moved to opposite the castle. Sheena Higgins was one of the last of a long line of sweetie shops. Previous, it was Sam and Jessie McKee. And Mrs. Broadfoot, whose ice cream had its loyal supporters in competition with Angelini's. I was sitting in the car along the street last week when I heard two ladies walking past, and one said to the other, "Lawn used to be an ice cream shop." And I wondered how long ago it was since she'd last visited Kirkcudbright. Round the corner, we've gone back to this image again, which shows that there were in the shop at that time. The three shops which are next in line, over the years there have been several shops here. Sam has helpfully included a list on one of his photographs, showing the Italian takeaway, which at one point was Carlo's, carpet shop, various cafes, antique shop, craft shop, and wine shop. And probably a cut above the rest was in between them. Snack Attack in the middle. This was the shop prior to being called Artist and Makers Today. And in 2008, Tamburini's, which was a fish and chip shop, and the antique shop prior to its moving to opposite the harbour. Snack Attack, which is still there, a takeaway sandwich shop owned and run by Laura and Chris Baker. It opened in 1997. Harvey's carpet shop and the wine cellar at the other end, and in between, possibly the cut above with Ian Jackson in the middle. And then McClymonds. Before this, from approximately 1957 to 1985, McClymonds were here. As can be seen, a draper's shop owned and run by Mr. Alec McClymont and his son Alec. Kirkcudbright's answer to Are You Being Served? One memory folk have are the wooden storage boxes. These can still be found round the town as they're ideal for storage. There were two shops here before McClymont expanded. The original McClymonts was on the left-hand side, here showing the decorations for the shop in 1937 for the coronation of King George VI. At the same time, here we are with Mr. McClymont Senior in the doorway on the right. And couldn't go without having Mr. and Mrs. McClymont. The shop on the right at this time was Shields, which can be seen here on the left. Shields sold boots and shoes. And I remember being taken in as a young child and getting a pair of red sandals. I was so pleased with them, I took them to bed with me. In 1953, the shop was owned by J.J. Aiken of Tungland. Number 65 is now an optician's. Prior to that, it was a pet shop. On the left, soon after Duncan and Sandra Chalmers started in 2009, and on the right in 2010. Another example of a snapshot, not only showing the parade, but the shops at the back. Greetings card at 65, plus Jeff Kerr's before he moved over the road. An early video shop, this was the 7th in Dumfries and Galloway. Grocers shop selling Maid Marian goods, owned and run by Jim and Mila Carson. Both well-known volunteers in the town. Mila ran the Girls' Brigade, and Jim was treasurer for the festivities. Back to this photo, this one showing Brown's in 1953. The trades organised several trade fairs, and this one was in the early 1950s, with Jack Brown chairing the meeting the opening ceremony with Violet Carson, who was already well known on radio prior to her being in Coronation Street, of course. On the right, we have Colin Kinnear, next to him Archie Watson, Mrs. Kinnear and Mrs. Watson. Mrs. Hastings between Violet and Sandy, and Jack rather. From the left we have Mrs. Brown, and then we have Mr. and Mrs. Kelly. In 1907, Jack Brown is a small boy on the right, his father in the middle. The wagon has Brown's written on the tarpaulin. And next door is yet a third Brown, this time J. Brown. So we've had a J. Brown, an A. Brown, and a W. Brown. Maybe someone Brown will be able to tell me who they all were. At present, J. Curving, ceramics. For a time, the shop was used as a second-hand shop. And in 2016, Kirkcudbright Development Trust had it as Kirkcudbright Cycles. And we had our very own tattooist, although I don't know that anyone in Kirkcudbright had that done to them. One time, Southwest Computers were here. Before we had that for a spell, a branch of Mitchell's TV shop from Castle Douglas. 1953, it was Kirkland's. Billy Kirkland and Jessie had a variety of goods, plus selling the Sunday papers. Here they are at a function in the early 50s. And in 1907, we have it as J. Brown. Next door, the charity shop supports the running of the swimming pool. Prior to this, it was Solway Books, before it was moved to where Mugshots is now. Kirkcudbright Thistle is a gift shop and schoolwear owned by Mike Craig. And before that, it was Kildue's. Gents Outfitter and Barbers in the rear. And at some point, John Kildue, cabinet and antique dealer, but no date, so I'm afraid I don't know when that was. This charity shop supports the festivities run by volunteers. Came here after being in part of the bus station. A well-known wool shop and children's wear, Middleton's, at one point managed by Nettie McKnight and then owned by her. In 1953, it was Middleton's. No photograph of it as Middleton's, so I found one of Nettie. And M. Palmer, which sold, as you can see, silk threads and various handicrafts, hats and stockings. This is a 2009 photo of Hall's Butchers, nowadays run by Alan Kildoo, the bottom. Above him, the last two in several generations of the Hall family. On the left, to run the shop. On the left, Alistair Hall, and on the right, Peter Hunter. Peter's mother was Nell Hall. White House Gallery, previously Don Philpott and daughter. Owned and run by Jane Sargent. They also went round country fairs where they had a stand. Another early video shop, and before that, a very well-known owner here was Jackie McAdam. Well known for making all their customers feel special. Seeing it's you, and he would think you were getting a bargain, which in fact you never were. Saddlery, gifts, Meccano, dinky toys, etc. His wife also worked in the shop, and it's there in 1953. Many a school bag was mended by him. They closed in 1977. Before that, next door, there are several hairdressers. I'm afraid I don't actually know all the different order that they came in. You've got the Shade Salon, Studio One, Pal's Hair Studio. Before that, it was the Trustee Savings Bank, which had moved from Castle Street. And before that, the ladies' equivalent of the shop along the street, Kildoo's. It had a hairdresser's upstairs. As can be seen here, they have been open since 1986. Tolbooth Crafts. Before that, the Burns brothers, who had relocated here from Mews Lane. Two quiet men who also ran a taxi service. When driving their car, the hat was always on. Robbie kept his wartime experience very quiet. He was a flight engineer in a Lancaster bomber when he flew over 50 missions. Helen Hunter, Peter's mother, had a soft furnishing shop here. Welsh, the electrician from Castle Douglas, was here for a spell. And before that, Harry Beattie. That's us down to the end of St. Mary Street. You would realise when you saw the pictures of McMichael's Bakery, previously Gordon's, that picture was used in some of the promotion. And I've been asked where the other was that was on the posters. It is now Super Saves. Prior to Super Save being there, it was the Co-op, and prior to that, at some point, it was Harbour Stores. Next door, Gowans, a branch of the Castle Douglas shop, is here. Showing you this because I was asked specifically one day what was there before. Percy Brothers, another branch of a Castle Douglas shop. Percy Brothers came in the early 60s, selling mainly televisions, renting televisions. It was a really modern shop in the town at the time. The TV reception was very poor then, and most of us depended on Northern Ireland for our programmes. Percy Brothers erected an aerial on the hill at High Kirkland and cabled the TV down into the town, where you could pay to be able to use it, long before the time of cable television now. One night, all the television signal in the town disappeared. Eventually discovered that my pet rabbit had bitten through the cable. It was called Biggles. Before them, the building was a private residence lived in by the Kirkpatrick family. I hope you've seen from these how important snapshots are for giving information that isn't always obvious. Here a snapshot of a view of St. Cuthbert Street with the rose beds, Percy Brothers, Co-op, Briquets, known as Mario's, the Constitutional Hall, and so on up the street. Snapshots of somebody like this one can also give a lot of information. A nice image of Jock Gourlay pushing a barrow about 1960. Council workmen in those days used hand carts to transport their goods and equipment and tools. Shortly after this, Jock was provided with a tractor. Compared to nowadays, when most of the local government workers seem to have their own van. Behind him, Melbourne's, then the commercial hotel, and probably the bank on the corner. A current photograph taken by Sam last month, showing the shops now. Maybe there'll be somebody in 50 years' time using this. And looking the other way, showing the shops behind again. Rhubarb, Catherine King's. A snapshot of where Catherine King's Electricity Board showroom. We've come to the end of a little bit of town's history as shown through the shops in St. Mary Street. I hope you found it interesting and thank you for listening.